I recommend that you watch this lesson, or I recommend you to watch this lesson. Are these sentences the same? Are they acceptable? The answer is no to both of those questions. These sentences have subtle differences in structure and usage, and it's also much better to use one instead of the other. And before we get into all of that, if you are someone who likes to fine-tune your grammar skills, please subscribe, turn on notifications. That way I can become your teacher. My name is Wes. The channel is Interactive English. It's all about trying to help you reach your fluency goals. Now, to begin with, let's get something very simple out of the way just to make sure that we're on the same page. And I want to talk to you about the meaning of the verb recommend. And I actually like the definition from Longman Dictionary the best. To advise someone to do something, especially because you have special knowledge of a situation or subject. This is an incredibly common verb. We use it all the time, and I want to make sure that we iron out any possible mistakes if you use this verb when speaking or writing. So let's begin with the sentence, I recommend that you do something. This construction is the subjunctive mood. Now, you may be thinking, what the hell is the subjunctive mood? That is a good question, and let's have a little fun. We can ask ChatGPT. The subjunctive mood is a verb form used to express things that are not certain or real, like wishes, hopes, suggestions, or hypothetical situations. So let's focus on the suggestion or advice part, and it says, I recommend that he study more. The studying has not happened yet, it's just a suggestion. But I want you to think about that he study, because it may look a little strange. We're not going to conjugate that subject and verb. I'm not going to say he studies, which is what you would normally think about. This is the subjunctive mood, so I'm going to use the base verb. I recommend that he study more. Think about the pattern. We're going to use recommend plus that plus the subject plus the base verb. We're going to use this pattern when speaking and writing. Now, there are other sentence patterns that we can use with the verb recommend, which definitely makes this confusing, and I will come back to that a little bit later on. But I also want you to keep in mind that the subjunctive mood is more commonly used in American English, which is where I'm from the US, than it is used in British English. And here are some more examples. I recommend that you take an umbrella. I recommend that she see a doctor. I recommend that we book our flights in advance. And yeah, that is something that I would typically recommend. Here are some other real-life examples.
Recommend that you formally apologize.
I am going to recommend that she leave the relationship.
I recommend that you start now.
I recommend strongly that you come forward.
Now, one thing I want to point out is that we have our verb recommend followed by a noun clause, which begins with the word that. And you do not have to use that at the beginning of the noun clause. You can omit it if you want. I recommend you take an umbrella. I recommend she see a doctor. I recommend we book our flights in advance. Now, the meaning is the same, but if you are curious as to which form is more commonly used, we can check out Ngram Viewer, which allows us to compare the frequency of different words and phrases. So if we're talking about recommend plus go, it's a little more common to omit the word that. I recommend you go. If we're talking about recommend plus take, once again, it's more common to omit that. And then finally, if we're talking about recommend plus work, it's slightly more common to use that. I recommend that you work. But really, the point is that you can use either one, whether you want to use that at the beginning of the noun clause or omit it. Both are perfectly fine, and the meaning is the same. Now, let's talk about I recommend you to do something. And we can keep this short and sweet because the use of to after the verb recommend generally is considered incorrect in standard English. Because look, I'll be honest, if someone were to say, I recommend you to take an umbrella, it just sounds really unnatural and a bit awkward when I hear this. And I really wanted to point this out because I hear people use this form all the time when having a conversation. And they say, I recommend you to do something. And I recommend that you avoid using this form and use the other form that we talked about. And I want you to say, I recommend that you do something. But let's try to get a better understanding as to why there is some confusion. First, in some languages, the structure is more natural. So if you are just translating in your head, I understand why some people would make this mistake and they use this form. Second, this form is not necessarily incorrect, it's just very uncommon. If you are going to come across this form, it's much more commonly used in the passive voice. So in this case, our pattern is the subject receiving the action plus the verb to be plus the past participle of the verb recommend followed by the infinitive. So consider the following. This is an active sentence. If I say, airlines recommend that passengers arrive 2 hours before their flight. This is an active sentence. I'm using the form recommend that someone do something. Airlines recommend that passengers arrive. Now, if I were to change this sentence to the passive, then I could say passengers are recommended to arrive 2 hours before their flight. This is in the passive voice, so my subject, the passengers receiving the action, plus the verb to be, plus the past participle of the verb recommend. Passengers are recommended, and then we have that too, because we're using the infinitive. Passengers are recommended to arrive. So in this case, we have that form using to. However, the sentence is in the passive voice. Both of these sentences sound natural to my ears, whether we're talking about the active or the passive, but here are some more examples of this form with the passive.
Portable electronic devices with lithium-ion batteries are recommended to be removed and placed in carry-on baggage.
Teenagers are recommended to get 9 to 10 hours of sleep, and adults normally around 7 to 8 hours.
Now, the vast majority of the time when you are speaking or writing, you're going to use active sentences. And that is why I recommend that you use the form that I'm using right now. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are other sentence structures using the verb recommend, and I want to have a look at them right now. So you could recommend doing something, and we're going to follow the verb recommend with the gerund. I recommend taking an umbrella. I recommend eating healthy foods. I recommend hitting the like button, and I just wanted to sneak that suggestion in there. Here are some more examples using recommend and the gerund.
I recommend taking surface streets.
Well, I recommend keeping the door closed.
I recommend knowing before speaking.
But I wouldn't recommend giving him any of our travel plans from now on.
You could also recommend something to someone. And this is also a little confusing because you see that to in there, but we're talking about recommending something to someone. And we're going to talk about a person or a pronoun. So often you're going to use this structure in the past tense because the recommendation has already been made. I could say, she recommended the movie to her friend, or they recommended a restaurant to us. Now, that doesn't always mean that you're going to use this in the past tense. I could also say, I recommend this channel to anyone who would like to practice and improve their English fluency. And yes, that is true. Here are some more examples using this structure.
Gonna recommend this to your friends?
Yes. Very good. Firm but tender. Recommend you to a friend.
Why are you reading a comic book? Denise recommended it to me.
So the main takeaway is that I want you to use the form I recommend that you do something when making a suggestion to another person. We're going to use recommend plus that plus the subject plus the base verb. I'll give you one last example. I recommend that you watch another video lesson if you'd like to continue practicing and improving your English skills. And that is everything that you need to know about using this very common and useful verb, recommend. And if you enjoyed the lesson and learned something new, you can let me know by hitting that like button. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. So long.